My mother-in-law had a PhD in psychology. She spent 30 years studying the human mind, how people think, how they break, how they can be quietly, carefully reshaped. I didn't know any of that when I married Daniel, and honestly, I'm not sure it would have stopped me. But I wish someone had warned me, because by the time I figured out what she was doing to me, to us, I had already started to doubt my own memory, my own words, my own sanity. This is the story of how I almost lost my marriage, my confidence, and my grip on reality, and how a small digital recorder hidden in my coat pocket saved everything. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to Daniel for 6 years. When I first met him, I thought I'd won the lottery. Not because of money, we were both just scraping by back then, but because of who he was: patient, gentle, funny in that quiet, dry way that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. He was the kind of man who remembered what you said 3 weeks ago and brought it up at exactly the right moment. I fell hard, and I fell fast. His mother, Margaret, was charming when we met, polished, the kind of woman who always said the right thing in the right tone at the right time. She brought wine to our first dinner, hugged me a little too long, and told me Daniel had never brought anyone home before. I remember feeling flattered. I should have paid attention to that hug. It lasted just a fraction too long, and her eyes over my shoulder stayed open. But I was 28, I was in love, and I wanted her to like me. We got married in the fall, 2 years later. Small ceremony, Daniel's family in the front row. Margaret cried. Everyone said how happy she looked. For the first year of our marriage, things were fine. Good, even. Daniel and I found our rhythm. We argued sometimes, every couple does, but nothing serious. Nothing that felt like a crack in the foundation. Then Daniel's father had a health scare, and Margaret moved into the city, 40 minutes away from us. Everything changed after that. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about what she did. It was designed to be gradual, invisible, the kind of slow erosion that you only recognize in hindsight when you finally zoom out and see the full picture. It started with small comments. Daniel would come home from visiting his parents and say something strange, something that didn't quite fit. Mom mentioned you called her last Thursday. She said you seemed upset about something. I didn't call her last Thursday. I didn't call her at all. She said you did. She said you were crying. Daniel, I didn't call her. He'd shrug, drop it, but there was this pause before the shrug, this half second where I could see him deciding what to believe. I told myself it was a miscommunication, a misremembered date. Old people mix things up. But Margaret wasn't old. She was 62, sharp as a blade, and she didn't mix things up. Then it was conversations. Daniel would come home and tell me something I'd apparently said to her, a complaint I'd made about his work schedule, a concern I'd expressed about his drinking, which, for the record, was 1 glass of wine at dinner, completely normal, an offhand comment about not being sure I wanted children after all. I hadn't said any of it, but the way he presented it, calm, not accusatory, like he was just checking in, it made me feel like I was the unreliable one. Like maybe I had said those things and forgotten, or said something that could have been interpreted that way. I think your mom might be twisting things a little, I finally told him one night in the kitchen. He looked at me with this expression. Not angry, concerned. Claire, he said carefully, she's not twisting anything. She's just trying to understand you. And something cold settled into my chest. Over the next several months, the pattern became more sophisticated. Margaret would invite us for Sunday dinners, and during those dinners, she would gently, always gently, steer conversations toward things that unsettled me. My childhood, my relationship with my own parents who had divorced when I was 12. She had a way of asking questions that felt like concern, but left you exposed, opened up in ways you hadn't agreed to. You mentioned before that you struggle to trust people, she said to me once over roast chicken. Completely understandable given everything you went through. It must be hard for Daniel to feel like he's always being tested. I looked at Daniel. He was nodding, slowly. I've never said I struggled to trust people. Not to her. She smiled, patient, serene. Maybe you don't remember, sweetheart. We were in the garden. It was June, I think. You were talking about your father. Her eyes were warm, her voice was completely steady, and I sat there trying to remember June in the garden, trying to remember what I'd said, turning the memory over and over, finding nothing, just a blank space where the memory should have been. That night, Daniel asked me if I was okay. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind, I told him honestly. He held me, he kissed my forehead. Maybe you've been under a lot of stress, he said. Mom thinks you might benefit from talking to someone. Of course she did. I started keeping a journal. Not because I had any plan, just because I needed somewhere to write down what was real, what I actually said, what I actually did, and what actually happened before the version of events got replaced by her version. And writing it down helped. It made me feel less crazy. It gave me something to hold on to when I walked into Sunday dinner and felt the ground tilt slightly beneath my feet. But then, one Sunday, something happened that finally pushed me past the edge of just coping. Daniel and I had a disagreement on the drive over. Something small. I don't even remember the topic now. By the time we got to his parents' house, we had moved past it, I thought. But somehow, Margaret knew about it. Not just the general shape of it, the specific words. She pulled me aside in the kitchen while Daniel helped his father with something in the garage. She put her hand on my arm and looked at me with that practiced expression of deep, sorrowful concern. I just want you to know, she said quietly, that Daniel tells me everything. He has since he was a boy, and I worry about you two. I felt ice in my stomach. What did he say? He told me what you said in the car, tilted her head, about feeling trapped. I hadn't said I felt trapped. I had said I felt tired of a particular discussion. Those are not the same thing. That's not what I said, I told her. She squeezed my arm. I know it's difficult when you're struggling, but I really think a professional could help you sort through some of what you're feeling. I drove home that night in complete silence. Daniel tried to make conversation. I couldn't answer. Because I realized, very clearly, sitting in the passenger seat watching the streetlights blur past the window, this was not confusion. This was not miscommunication. This was a campaign, systematic, deliberate, and designed by someone who understood exactly how the human mind unravels. So I bought a small digital recorder. It was nothing fancy, just a slim silver device that fit in the inside pocket of my coat. I checked the battery every Sunday morning. I pressed record before I got out of the car. I said nothing to Daniel. I waited. 3 Sundays, that's how long it took. 3 Sundays of recording conversations, transferring the audio to my laptop, listening back while Daniel slept. The first Sunday, nothing particularly dramatic, just the ambient murmur of family dinner. But I noticed how often Margaret redirected conversations back to me, how often she asked me questions that seemed designed to produce a certain kind of answer. It was subtle enough that I couldn't point to any single moment and say, there, that's it. Then, the second Sunday, I had it. Not everything, but enough to shake me. Daniel had stepped outside to take a call from work. Margaret and I were alone in the living room. She brought me a cup of tea, sat down across from me, and the conversation started the way it always did. Gentle, warm, a little too intimate. "Can I ask you something?" she said, "and I want you to be honest with me." "Sure," I said. "Do you ever feel like Daniel isn't enough for you, emotionally?" I stared at her. "Absolutely not." She nodded slowly. "Because he mentioned to me recently that you've been pulling away, that you seem checked out." "He said that?" "In so many words." She folded her hands in her lap. I don't want to alarm you, Claire, but I think it might be worth looking at whether this relationship is actually serving you. I said something noncommittal. I changed the subject. I waited until Daniel came back inside. That night, I sat with my headphones in and listened back to every word. And there it was, her voice, low and steady and entirely deliberate, suggesting with all the calm authority of a woman who had spent her career reshaping people's perceptions, that I was unhappy, that I was pulling away, that Daniel had told her things he had never actually said to me. I listened to it 4 times. I wasn't losing my mind. She was trying to make me lose it. The 3rd Sunday, I was ready. I didn't come in hot. I didn't show up with accusations or a prepared speech. That's not how you beat someone like Margaret. You don't win by escalating. You win by letting the evidence speak when she can't control it. I sat through the entire dinner. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I helped clear the plates. And then, while we were all sitting in the living room with coffee, I said very quietly, "I want to play something for everyone." Daniel looked at me. His father looked at me. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something moved behind her eyes, some flicker of calculation. I pressed play. The room was completely silent. The only sound was the soft crackle of audio, and then her voice filling the air, smooth and deliberate and impossible to misinterpret. Do you ever feel like Daniel isn't enough for you emotionally? In so many words. I think it might be worth looking at whether this relationship is actually serving you. I stopped the recording. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Daniel turned to look at his mother. His face had gone completely still, the kind of stillness that comes before something breaks. Margaret set down her coffee cup very carefully. She looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years, the warmth was completely gone. "That was taken out of context," she said. "I have 3 hours of recordings. Would you like me to play the rest?" She didn't answer. Here's what came out over the following weeks, once Daniel finally started asking questions instead of taking her word for things. Margaret had done this before. Not to me specifically, but the pattern existed. Daniel's first serious girlfriend, years before we met, had ended their relationship abruptly after a period of apparently growing instability. Daniel had always assumed it was just how things fell apart. He'd never questioned why. There had been a therapist, too, that Margaret had recommended to Daniel years ago, a colleague of hers, it turned out, someone who provided her with updates. I'm not saying what she was doing was illegal. I don't know enough about the law to say that. But I know what it felt like to be on the other side of it. And I know that Daniel spent a very long night sitting at our kitchen table, replaying conversations in his head, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, something between grief and fury and shame. He called his mother the next morning. I didn't listen to the call. I waited in the bedroom. When he came back, he sat down on the edge of the bed and said, "I'm so sorry, Claire." That was all. But it was real, and it was enough to start with. We didn't cut Margaret out immediately. These things are never that clean, especially when the person in question is someone's mother. But we set boundaries. Clear, non-negotiable, documented ones. No more one-on-one conversations that weren't acknowledged. No more secondhand reports of things I'd apparently said. No more Sunday dinners for a while. Daniel started his own therapy, a therapist he found himself with no connection to his mother whatsoever. He needed to untangle what was real, what was planted, what was genuinely his. That took time. It took a lot of honesty from both of us. I kept my recordings, all of them, backed up to 2 places. And Margaret? She never apologized. Not directly. She sent a card months later that said something about how much she loved her son and wanted his happiness. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just that smooth, serene surface, unmarked. I put the card in the same folder as the audio files. and close the drawer. Some people never stop being who they are. You just have to stop letting them be that person inside your life. That was the lesson, if there is one. You can love someone deeply and still build a wall between them and the people who need protection, not out of hate, out of necessity. Daniel and I are still together. We're more honest with each other now than we've probably ever been, because we had to be. We had to build it back up from scratch, piece by piece, with all the lights on. It's not perfect, but it's real. And after everything I went through questioning my own reality, real is the most valuable thing in the world. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever walked out of a conversation feeling smaller than when you walked in and couldn't explain why, leave a comment below. I want to hear from you. And if this story hit somewhere close to home, hit the like button and subscribe. More stories like this are coming, and I want you to be here for them. Take care of yourselves and trust what you know is true, even when someone is working very hard to make you doubt it.